welcome to another edition of History Science Fiber. I'm Zoe McDonald, I'm a biologist, and today we are dyeing with Tansy, also known as Tansy vulgare or bitter buttons. Now this is part of two playlists, one on dyeing with plants and the other dyeing during the summer season. Let's dive in. Now, this is a herbaceous flowering perennial, which is native to parts of Europe and Asia. Where I am in North America, it's very invasive. It's been recorded in use since about the 8th century, and it's used to flavor dishes like puddings and omelets for a long time. Now, some people with sensitive skin can develop contact dermatitis from it, so if you aren't sure or you know you have sensitive skin, harvest it with long sleeves and gloves.
So before we get started, I just wanted to give a shout out to Susan Wild, who just became one of my newest patrons, and to Yanka for her amazing shout out. So thank you both so much for your support. So Tansy, how do you recognize it? The stem is tall and often reddish. The plant stands anywhere from 5 to 150 centimeters or 20 to 60 inches. But most notable is the collection of yellow button-shaped flowers and these divided compound leaves, which look almost like ferns. Now, while it has been used in food in larger quantities, it's also poisonous, so don't eat it. It often grows in these large monoculture patches and outcompetes native species. So where it's invasive, harvesting the flowers is actually good for native species and can give them a chance. The good news is that it's a fairly concentrated and stable dyer, so you don't need a ton of it to dye with. I found this big patch in a field and got to work collecting. I harvested it by simply grabbing the flower heads and pulling it off, but you can also use snips. I roughly aimed for about 10-to-1 weight of fresh flowers to fiber and ended up filling a larger freezer bag about half full in about 5 to 10 minutes. So we're doing a forage like this. Basically, you have a big patch of invasive plants and you can pretty much take as much as you want. How do you decide how much to take? Well, it depends if you have a specific project in mind. Maybe you have wool in a natural colored home and you want to use that. Or you want to try out some sampling for colors first, or maybe you want to harvest a bunch and freeze some. You have lots of options. For me, I knew I wanted to dye at least 3 hanks that weigh 10 grams each. So that's 30 grams of wool. So with a 10-to-1 ratio, I knew I needed roughly 300 grams. So 300 grams of fresh flowers for 30 grams of wool, which is roughly about half a pound of flowers. So sometimes I think about the weight of my forage in terms of butter. So bear with me. I know about how much a pound of butter weighs, so I know I'm going to need about that, about half that to that. You can also ask yourself, how much can I fit in my dye pot and have room for water and have room for the fiber? Or how much can I carry home? So I took it home and I used it right away. I weighed it and it's about 470 grams. I only needed 300 grams. So this sounds like a great opportunity to try out an exhaust bath. Now we haven't talked a lot about exhaust baths, but they're great because you can get more colors without more work. Basically, when you're done dyeing, you just chuck in more wool in the pot for round 2. And I'll show you that a bit at the end for how I got 2 totally new colors out of it. So to start, I added the tansy to my pot and chopped it up a bit. That's when I realized I had skipped the part where I like to first add that paint mesh bag, which makes dyeing so much easier before I added my dye stuff. So I had to add an extra step of scooping the tansy flowers into the bag. You don't need to do this though if you add the bag first or you use cheesecloth or, similar. I then placed the dye pot onto my stove and simmered the flowers for about an hour, stirring occasionally. As a general rule of thumb, I watch to see that the plant matter goes from floating on top to sinking down as it cooks down. That means those dye pigments are really coming out of the plant and into the water. So I wanted to dye 3 separate hanks. 2 mortanted with alum at 16% weight of fiber, and 1 with iron at 6% weight of fiber. So there was 2 with alum because I wanted to take one of those and dip it into a solution of iron after it was dyed. This is called an over dip or a post-dye dip. It's another easy way to get a new color. So as the tansy was simmering, I wanted to pre-soak my 3 wool hanks in water. This step means when it comes time to add my fiber in, it will sink into the dye easily and take up more of that dye. Now, before you soak your yarn, you want to make sure they're in a big loose loop and tied in at least 2 places. If it's a big hank, you want 4 places. Now, once it had simmered and cooled down, I added in my pre-soaked fiber and heated the dye pot back up to a simmer and heated for another hour. Again, stirring every 10 minutes or so. If you have a lot of fiber in the pot, you'll also want to flip it at the half-hour mark to allow for an even uptake of dye. Also, don't poke and stir the fiber too much as it can felt. Just enough to move it around, keep it happy. I then let the dye pot cool. Now it was time for the over dip for one of the alum warranted skeins. I took one of those hanks out of the pot and into a smaller dye pot with just enough dye solution to keep the fiber submerged. From there, I quickly removed the fiber, added about a teaspoon of iron as ferrous sulfate, stirred to dissolve it, and then added the fiber back in. Within about a minute or 2, it was a lovely rich green. I then removed the other 2 hanks from the original pot and gave them a rinse. I then went ahead with an exhaust bath and added in 2 more skeins pre-mortanted with alum and pre-soaked. I simmered them for an hour and got a lemony yellow. I then did the same overdip with iron on one of them and got a paler green. Here are the colors that I got. The first skein, just with alum, came out a beautiful bright yellow. The alum warranted one that got the iron overdip came out a rich green. The iron warranted one came out a rich chocolate brown. For the exhaust bath, the alum warranted one came out that lemony yellow. And the alum warranted yarn that got the overdip with iron came out a paler green. So all in all, from one pot, I got 5 distinct colors that look amazing together in a knitting, crocheting, or weaving project. Tansy was really easy to dye with and the results were great. A 5-star dyer. That's it for today. Like and subscribe for future videos on all things dye and fiber related.